The observation deck of the Galactic Council Station buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 17 different species gathered to witness something unprecedented. Through the reinforced transparasteel windows, they watched a human transport vessel approach the quarantine zone around Kepler 442b, a planet that had been declared forbidden for over 3 centuries. Ambassador Zethka of the Vraxian Consortium adjusted his ceremonial robes with trembling appendages. "This is madness," he whispered to his aide. "No species has survived contact with the Shadow Maw for more than standard minutes. The humans will be slaughtered before they even make planetfall." The aide, a younger Vraxian named Quelth, consulted his datapad with obvious concern. "The records are clear, Ambassador. Every expedition to Kepler 442b has ended in total annihilation. The hegemony lost 3 battlecruisers. The Zephyrian Empire sent their finest warriors and none returned. Even the mechanical synthetic collective's drones were torn apart within hours." On the observation deck's central display, detailed scans of the planet's surface showed a world that should have been paradise. Lush forests covered vast continents, crystal-clear rivers wound through valleys of flowering meadows, and the atmosphere readings indicated perfect conditions for most known life forms. Yet beneath this beauty lurked something so terrifying that it had earned a classification beyond even the most dangerous predator categories, the Shadow Maw. No one knew exactly what it looked like, as no recording device had ever captured clear footage and survived. The few garbled transmissions that had been recovered before communication cut out forever described something massive, something that moved with impossible speed through the shadows of the forest canopy, something that could tear through military-grade armor like paper and devour entire landing parties in minutes. Fleet Admiral Korvac of the Therian Military Command stood rigid at attention, his scales shifting through deep purples and blues that indicated extreme stress. "The humans requested permission to attempt contact," he announced to the gathered delegates. "When we explained the danger, they insisted they had a different approach. Against all military advice, the Council granted their request." "Different approach?" scoffed Trade Minister Yalara of the Cetacean Union, her biosuit's waters clouding with agitation. "What approach could possibly work where superior firepower, advanced technology, and overwhelming numbers have all failed? The humans are a young species. They lack our experience, our weapons, our understanding of true cosmic threats." Through the viewing windows, the human vessel continued its steady approach toward the planet. It was a modest craft compared to the massive war machines that previous expeditions had employed. No visible weapon systems, no heavy armor plating, no escort fleet of battlecruisers. Just a simple transport ship carrying what the humans had described as a diplomatic mission. The Galactic Council's most senior member, ancient wise mind Turok of the crystalline hierarchy, spoke in harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "Perhaps their youth is precisely why they might succeed where we have failed. Sometimes fresh perspective reveals solutions that experience overlooks. Or sometimes inexperience leads to unnecessary death," Admiral Korvac replied grimly. "I've prepared a recovery fleet to collect whatever remains can be found after the inevitable slaughter." On the planet's surface, automated monitoring stations that had been placed at safe distances from the Shadow Maw's territory began transmitting new data. Seismic readings showed the creature was already aware of the approaching vessel. The ground trembled with the rhythm of massive footsteps moving through the deep forest, heading toward the projected landing site. Dr. Elena Vasquez checked her equipment one final time as the transport ship entered Kepler 442b's atmosphere. Around her in the cargo bay, her small team of xenobiologists and diplomats made their own final preparations, but their supplies were unlike anything previous expeditions had brought to this cursed world. "Landing in 30 minutes, announced Captain Martinez over the intercom. "Surface conditions are optimal. No hostile contacts detected yet, but that's about to change." Elena's assistant, Dr. James Park, looked nervous as he secured the last of their unusual cargo. Elena, are you absolutely certain about this approach? Every piece of data we have suggests this creature is beyond reasoning with. It's a killing machine that has destroyed every attempt at contact. Elena smiled, her confidence unwavering despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. James, that's exactly the problem with every previous expedition. They all approached this as a military operation or a scientific study. They came with weapons, with containment systems, with the assumption that they needed to control or defeat the Shadow Maw. She gestured to the cargo they had brought, carefully sealed containers that held not weapons or scientific instruments, but something entirely different. We're not here to fight it or capture it or study it like a specimen. We're here to offer it something no one else ever thought to bring. Food, Dr. Park said, still skeptical. You want to feed the most dangerous predator in known space. Not just any food, Elena corrected. The right food. Our analysis of the planet's ecosystem shows clear signs of ecological disruption. The Shadow Maw isn't just a random monster terrorizing the galaxy for sport. It's a creature that's been isolated. Possibly starving, definitely desperate. The ship touched down in a clearing several kilometers from the forest edge, exactly as previous expeditions had done. But instead of immediately deploying defensive positions and weapons systems, the human team began unloading their cargo with careful, deliberate movements that suggested respect rather than aggression. From orbit, the gathered alien delegates watched through high-resolution feeds as the humans set up what appeared to be some kind of feeding station. Large containers were opened to reveal vast quantities of what their scans identified as organic biomatter, but processed and prepared in ways that seemed almost ritualistic. They're preparing a meal, Ambassador Zethka observed with disbelief. They're actually trying to feed the Shadow Maw. Madness, Admiral Korvac repeated. The creature will devour them along with whatever offerings they've brought. But as the human team worked, something unexpected happened. The seismic readings from the forest changed. Instead of the rapid, aggressive movement patterns that had preceded every previous attack, the tremors became more cautious, more curious. The Shadow Maw was still approaching, but its behavior seemed different. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the clearing as her team finished their preparations. In the distance, she could see massive shapes moving between the ancient trees, shadows that seemed to flow like liquid darkness despite their obvious size. Her heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation. Remember, she called to her team, no sudden movements, no direct eye contact until we're invited, and most importantly, no defensive postures. We're guests here, not invaders. The first glimpse of the Shadow Maw sent shockwaves through the orbital observation station. As the creature emerged from the forest edge, delegates who had served in the military gasped at its sheer size and obvious power. It stood nearly 20 meters tall, with a body that seemed to blend feline grace with reptilian strength. Its hide was deep black with patterns that shifted like living shadows, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. But instead of charging forward to attack as every previous encounter had documented, the Shadow Maw stopped at the forest edge. It watched the humans with those burning eyes, its massive head tilted in what almost seemed like curiosity. Elena stepped forward slowly, her hands empty and visible, and began to speak. Not in any of the standard galactic languages, but in soft, rhythmic tones that seemed designed to soothe rather than command. She gestured toward the feeding station they had prepared, where containers of carefully selected foods were arranged in patterns that suggested offering rather than bait. "What is she doing?" Trade Minister Ylara asked, her biosuit's water now crystal clear with fascination. "Ancient wise mind." Turok's harmonics shifted to frequencies of wonder. She's communicating, not with words or technology, but with intent and respect. She's treating the Shadow Maw as an equal, not as a threat to be neutralized. The Shadow Maw took a single, careful step forward, then another. Each movement was deliberate, non-threatening despite the creature's obvious capability for devastating violence. As it drew closer to the feeding station, its behavior became even more remarkable. The creature lowered its massive head and carefully examined the offerings the humans had brought. Its movements were not those of a mindless predator, but of an intelligent being evaluating an unexpected gift. After several minutes of investigation, the Shadow Maw selected one of the food containers and consumed its contents with surprising delicacy. "Impossible," Admiral Korvac breathed. "It's actually accepting their offering. In over 300 years of recorded contact attempts, nothing like this has ever occurred." Elena continued her soft vocalizations as the Shadow Maw fed, and gradually, incredibly, the creature began to respond. Not with the roars of aggression that had terrorized previous expeditions, but with low, rumbling sounds that seemed almost conversational. Dr. Park, monitoring the interaction from a safe distance, noticed something extraordinary in his readings. "Elena," he called softly, "the creature's biochemical signatures are showing elevated levels of oxytocin and dopamine analogs. It's not just eating, it's experiencing what can only be described as pleasure and contentment." The implications struck the human team like lightning. The Shadow Maw wasn't a mindless killing machine. It was a highly intelligent creature that had been reacting with violence to perceived threats, but was capable of peaceful interaction when approached with the right intentions. As the feeding continued, more remarkable behaviors emerged. The Shadow Maw began to show what could only be described as gratitude, lowering its head toward Elena in a gesture that suggested acknowledgement and respect. When she carefully extended her hand, the creature allowed her to make contact with its massive snout, a moment that sent shock waves through every delegate watching from orbit. "They're bonding," ancient wise mind Turok observed with harmonics of amazement. "The human is forming a social connection with the most feared predator in our galaxy." The feeding session lasted for over 2 hours, during which the Shadow Maw consumed every offering the humans had brought while maintaining peaceful, almost friendly interaction with Elena's team. As the day progressed, the creature's behavior became increasingly relaxed and social, occasionally making vocalizations that seemed designed to communicate rather than intimidate. But perhaps most shocking of all was what happened when the feeding was complete. Instead of returning to the depths of the forest as expected, the Shadow Maw settled down near the human camp, adopting a resting position that kept it close to the team while clearly indicating non-threatening intent. "It doesn't want them to leave," Dr. Park observed with wonder. "After centuries of driving away every expedition with deadly force, the Shadow Maw wants the humans to stay." Elena looked up at her colleague with a smile that was visible even through the orbital feeds. "James, I don't think this creature has been attacking expeditions because it's evil or territorial. I think it's been desperately trying to communicate, and when beings kept coming with weapons and fear, it responded the only way it knew how." As night fell on Kepler 442b, the human team made the unprecedented decision to maintain their camp within sight of the Shadow Maw. Instead of fleeing the planet as every previous expedition had attempted to do, they settled in for what appeared to be an extended stay. The orbital observation station buzzed with frantic discussions as delegates tried to process what they had witnessed. Everything they thought they knew about the Shadow Maw, about predators, about the nature of interspecies contact, had been challenged by a simple human approach based on offering food and showing respect. "This changes everything," Ambassador Zethka said quietly. "If the humans are right, if the Shadow Maw isn't a monster but a misunderstood intelligent being, then we've been wrong about one of the most significant discoveries in galactic history." Admiral Korvac studied the peaceful scene on the planet's surface with new understanding dawning in his military mind. "All those expeditions we lost, all those lives, they died because we approached this creature as an enemy, instead of trying to understand it as a potential friend." As the first day of human contact with the Shadow Maw concluded, Elena Vasquez made a final log entry that would reshape galactic understanding of interspecies relations for generations to come. Day 1. Peaceful contact established with the entity designated Shadow Maw. Creature demonstrates high intelligence, complex emotional responses, and clear desire for social interaction. Preliminary assessment suggests previous hostile encounters resulted from fear and miscommunication rather than inherent aggression. Recommend immediate revision of threat classification and establishment of formal diplomatic protocols. Above the planet, 17 different species of galactic delegates faced a profound question that would test their understanding of intelligence, communication, and the nature of civilization itself. The humans had achieved in one day what the combined might and wisdom of the galaxy had failed to accomplish in 3 centuries. They had offered friendship to a creature everyone else had considered a monster, and that creature had accepted. 3 weeks had passed since the first peaceful contact with the Shadow Maw, and the orbital observation station had transformed from a site of morbid curiosity into the most important diplomatic outpost in galactic history. Every major species had sent additional delegates, xenobiologists, and cultural experts to witness the unprecedented developments unfolding on Kepler 442b's surface. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood beside her unusual companion as the morning sun filtered through the forest canopy, casting dancing shadows across the clearing that had become their shared camp. The creature she had come to know as Cathara, a name that emerged from their growing communications system, rested peacefully nearby while grooming its midnight black hide with careful precision. The transformation in their relationship had been remarkable to observe. What had begun as tentative food sharing had evolved into a complex partnership that challenged every assumption the galaxy held about predator behavior and interspecies communication. Cathara demonstrated not just intelligence, but curiosity, humor, and what could only be described as affection for the human team. "The linguistic analysis is complete," Dr. James Park announced as he approached Elena with his datapad, careful not to make any sudden movements that might disturb Cathara. Over the weeks, the team had learned that the Shadow Maw responded best to calm, deliberate behavior that showed respect for its massive size and obvious power. Elena reviewed the data with growing excitement. "These vocalizations are incredibly sophisticated. Cathara isn't just making random sounds. There's grammatical structure, tonal variations that indicate emotional context, and what appears to be a complex system for describing abstract concepts." "More than that," Dr. Park continued, "the pattern recognition algorithms have identified recurring themes in Cathara's communications, references to time, to waiting, to loneliness. Elena, I think this creature has been trying to tell us something important about its past." From orbit, the alien delegates watched through high-resolution feeds as Elena approached Cathara with the careful respect that had become standard protocol for all interactions. The massive creature acknowledged her presence with a low, harmonious rumble that their translation systems were beginning to interpret as a greeting combined with contentment. Ambassador Zethka of the Vraxian Consortium had become one of the most vocal advocates for expanding contact protocols based on the human approach. "Colleagues," he addressed the gathered delegates, "we are witnessing the emergence of a new paradigm in interspecies relations. The humans have demonstrated that our traditional assumption of superiority over non-technological species is not only wrong, but actively harmful." Trade Minister Ylara of the Cetacean Union had spent weeks analyzing the economic implications of the discovery. "The resources we've expended on military expeditions to this planet over 3 centuries could have funded peaceful contact missions to dozens of worlds. The human approach isn't just more ethical, it's more efficient." But not everyone was convinced that the peaceful contact would last. Admiral Korvac maintained his skeptical position, even as evidence mounted that Cathara posed no threat to beings who approached with peaceful intentions. One creature's behavior doesn't establish a pattern, he argued during the daily briefings. We're still dealing with a predator capable of immense destruction. The humans may simply be postponing the inevitable. His concerns seemed justified when long-range scans detected movement in the deeper regions of Kepler 442b's forests. The monitoring stations placed around the planet's perimeter began registering seismic signatures that suggested the presence of more creatures similar to Cathara, and they appeared to be moving toward the human camp. The discovery sent shockwaves through the observation station. Dr. Melissa Chen, the expedition's xenobiologist, was first to analyze the new readings. We're detecting at least 7 distinct signatures, possibly more. They're all roughly the same size and mass as Cathara, moving in coordinated patterns through the forest. Elena received the news while engaged in one of her daily communication sessions with Cathara. Over the weeks, she had developed an intuitive understanding of the creature's moods and behaviors, and she immediately noticed changes that suggested Cathara was aware of the approaching group. "You know they're coming, don't you?" Elena asked, softly, using the combination of vocalizations and gesture that had become their primary communication method. Cathara's response was a complex series of sounds that their translation system interpreted as acknowledgement combined with anticipation and what might have been nervousness. Dr. Park joined Elena at the communication station, his expression concerned. "The orbital command is recommending immediate evacuation. If there are multiple creatures like Cathara, and if they're not all as peaceful as our friend here, we could be facing the kind of situation that destroyed previous expeditions." Elena studied Cathara's body language carefully. The massive creature had risen from its resting position and was gazing toward the forest with obvious attention, but there were no signs of aggression or alarm. Instead, Cathara seemed to be waiting for something, and its vocalizations had taken on patterns that their limited translation suggested might indicate excitement rather than fear. "I don't think they're a threat," Elena said after several minutes of observation. "Look at Cathara's posture. This isn't defensive positioning. If anything, Cathara seems happy about whatever's approaching." The first of the new creatures emerged from the forest just before noon, and the sight sent the orbital delegates into emergency session. It was indeed another shadow maw, nearly identical to Cathara in size and general appearance, but with subtle differences in coloration and marking patterns that suggested individual identity. What happened next defied every prediction the galactic observers had made. Instead of territorial conflict or coordinated attack behavior, the new arrival approached Cathara with obvious familiarity and affection. The two massive creatures engaged in what could only be described as a greeting ritual, touching snouts and exchanging vocalizations that seemed joyful rather than threatening. "They know each other," Dr. Chen observed with amazement. "These aren't random predators coming to investigate intruders. These are social connections. Cathara has been separated from its community, and they're finally reuniting." Over the next several hours, 6 more creatures emerged from the forest depths, each greeting Cathara with the same obvious affection, and then turning curious but non-threatening attention to the human camp. Elena found herself at the center of the most significant first contact event in galactic history, as she carefully approached each new arrival with the same respect and peaceful intention that had won Cathara's trust. The alien delegates watched in stunned silence as Elena repeated the feeding ritual that had established peaceful relations with Cathara, offering carefully prepared food to each new creature, while maintaining the calm, respectful demeanor that seemed to be the key to successful communication. 7 shadow maws, Admiral Korvac said quietly, his voice tight with concern. 7 creatures that could destroy a battle fleet, and the humans are treating them like visiting dignitaries. Ancient wise mind. Turok's harmonics resonated with wonder. Perhaps that is exactly what they are. We assumed the shadow maw was a solitary predator because we only encountered one at a time. But what if Cathara was isolated from its community? What if the aggressive behavior we documented was the response of a social creature suffering from forced separation? The theory gained credibility as the day progressed. The 7 creatures, who Elena began to identify with individual names based on their markings and behavioral characteristics, demonstrated clear social bonds and cooperative behaviors. They shared food, engaged in what appeared to be complex conversations, and showed obvious care for each other's well-being. But more importantly, they extended this social behavior to include the human team. Elena found herself accepted not just as a food provider, but as a member of the group. The creatures would seek her out for interaction, include her in their social activities, and demonstrate protective behavior when anything in the environment seemed to pose a potential threat to the camp. Dr. Park documented these interactions with growing amazement. Elena, they're treating us like family members. These aren't predator-prey relationships or even human-pet dynamics. This is genuine interspecies friendship on a level we've never seen before. The implications rippled through the galactic community as news of the expanding peaceful contact spread. Species that had written off Kepler 442b as a dead world began to reconsider the possibility of establishing research stations or even colonies on the planet's vast continents. The shadow maws, it seemed, were not territorial in the traditional sense, but simply protective of their community. Elena made perhaps the most significant discovery during her 3rd week among the expanded group. Through patient communication and careful observation, she learned that the shadow maws had been waiting for contact from other intelligent species for generations. They had observed the various expeditions that had attempted to land on their world. But every approach had been aggressive or fearful, triggering defensive responses that escalated into violence. "They've been trying to make contact for centuries," Elena reported to the orbital station during her evening communication session. But every time someone landed with weapons and force fields and military protocols, it sent the message that the visitors saw them as enemies rather than potential friends. This revelation forced a complete reevaluation of galactic first contact procedures. The Galactic Council's standard protocols emphasized strength, technological superiority, and defensive posture as necessary elements of interspecies diplomacy. The human approach, based on respect, peaceful offering, and willingness to be vulnerable, had achieved more in 3 weeks than centuries of traditional methods. Ambassador Zethka proposed immediate revision of contact protocols across all Council member species. "We must acknowledge that our approach to unknown intelligence has been fundamentally flawed. The humans have demonstrated that strength and superiority are less effective than humility and respect." The week culminated in an event that would be remembered as a turning point in galactic civilization. The shadow maws, led by Cathara, began constructing what appeared to be permanent structures near the human camp. Using their impressive physical capabilities and obvious intelligence, they created shelters that seemed designed to accommodate both their own massive forms and the smaller human team members. "They're building a mixed community," Elena reported with wonder in her voice. "Not a research station where we study them, not a diplomatic outpost where we maintain formal relations, but an actual shared living space where both our species can coexist as equals." Dr. Chen analyzed the architectural choices with professional interest. "The design shows clear understanding of human needs while maintaining functionality for their own requirements. These structures aren't just shelters, they're statements of intent for long-term cohabitation." The construction project attracted the attention of engineering specialists throughout the galaxy. The shadow maws demonstrated not only physical strength, but sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, environmental management, and aesthetic design. Their buildings incorporated elements that would have challenged experienced galactic architects. Yet they were created using only natural materials and the creature's own impressive capabilities. As the shared community took shape, Elena began to understand the true magnitude of what they had discovered. The Shadow Maws weren't just intelligent predators who could be befriended. They were a sophisticated civilization that had been isolated from galactic contact by misunderstanding and fear. "How many other worlds have we written off as too dangerous to approach?" she asked during a late-night conversation with Dr. Park. "How many other species have we classified as hostile when they were really just defending themselves from what they perceived as aggressive contact?" The question haunted the galactic delegates as they watched the peaceful coexistence developing on Kepler 442b's surface. The humans had not only established contact with the Shadow Maws, but had been accepted as community members in what appeared to be a permanent arrangement. But the most significant revelation was yet to come. On the final day of the third week, Cathara approached Elena with obvious purpose and began a complex communication that took hours to complete. Through patient translation and interpretation, Elena realized that Cathara was extending a formal invitation not just to her team, but to the entire galactic community. The Shadow Maws wanted to join the galactic civilization, not as subjects or curiosities, but as equal partners in the exploration and development of the galaxy. They had knowledge, skills, and perspectives that could benefit every species in the Council, and they were willing to share them with any beings who approached them with the respect and friendship that the humans had demonstrated. The invitation represented more than just diplomatic contact. It was an opportunity to expand galactic civilization to include a species whose physical capabilities, intelligence, and social structures could revolutionize everything from engineering to exploration to interspecies relations. As Elena prepared her report for the Galactic Council, she realized that her mission had accomplished far more than establishing peaceful contact with a dangerous predator. They had discovered a potential ally whose partnership could reshape the future of galactic civilization, and they had done it through the simple act of offering food with respect and friendship rather than approaching with weapons and fear. The deadly beast that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was revealed to be not a monster at all, but a friend who had been waiting patiently for someone to offer the hand of friendship instead of the fist of conquest. 6 months after first contact, the Galactic Council chambers had been completely reconfigured to accommodate the most unusual diplomatic delegation in recorded history. 7 massive forms rested on specially constructed platforms that allowed the Shadow Maws to participate as equal members in galactic governance, their presence transforming what had once been a sterile political arena into something that resembled a natural amphitheater. Elena Vasquez stood at the central podium, no longer simply a xenobiologist on a research mission, but the official human ambassador to the Shadow Maw Commonwealth. Beside her, Cathara's imposing form radiated calm confidence as the creature prepared to address the assembled representatives of 17 different species for the first time. The months following the initial peaceful contact had brought revelations that reshaped everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence, civilization, and the nature of advanced society. The Shadow Maws, it turned out, possessed not just individual intelligence, but a collective technological and scientific understanding that had been developed over millennia of isolated evolution. "Honored delegates," Elena began, her voice carried by translation systems to every corner of the vast chamber. "I stand before you today not as a human speaking about an alien species, but as a representative of a partnership that has already begun to transform both our civilizations." The partnership had indeed been transformative. In the months since establishing permanent residence on Kepler 442b, the human team had learned that the Shadow Maws possessed sophisticated knowledge in fields ranging from ecological engineering to quantum physics. Their understanding had been developed through entirely different approaches than traditional galactic science, offering fresh perspectives on problems that had puzzled researchers for generations. Dr. James Park, now serving as Director of Human Shadow Maw Scientific Exchange, had compiled research findings that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development. They don't use metals or electronics as we understand them, he had explained during one of their regular briefings. Instead, they've developed biological technologies that achieve the same results through entirely organic processes. The implications were staggering. The Shadow Maws had created living computers that could perform calculations rival to any artificial intelligence, biological communication systems that allowed instant coordination across vast distances, and ecological management techniques that had maintained perfect environmental balance on their world for thousands of years. Admiral Korvac, who had initially been the most skeptical about peaceful contact, now served as the primary military liaison between galactic forces and the Shadow Maw defense capabilities. His transformation from opponent to advocate had been one of the most dramatic changes in galactic politics. 6 months ago, I believed the Shadow Maws represented the greatest threat to galactic security, Admiral Korvac addressed the assembly. Today, I can state with absolute confidence that they represent our greatest hope for addressing the challenges that face all our civilizations. The Admiral's change of heart had come gradually as he observed the Shadow Maw's approach to conflict resolution and defense. Rather than relying on overwhelming firepower or technological superiority, they had developed sophisticated strategies based on understanding, deterrence, and protection rather than destruction. When a group of space pirates had attempted to raid the outer settlements of the Therian system 3 months after first contact, the Shadow Maws had volunteered to assist in resolving the situation. Instead of engaging in space combat, they had used their biological communication systems to establish contact with the pirates and their remarkable empathic abilities to understand the root causes of their criminal behavior. The result had been unprecedented. Rather than a destructive military engagement that would have cost lives and resources, the pirates had been peacefully integrated into legitimate commercial activities, with their skills redirected toward beneficial purposes. The approach had been so successful that 12 other systems had requested similar assistance with various security challenges. The Shadow Maw approach to problem-solving emphasizes understanding and integration rather than elimination, Admiral Korvac continued. In my centuries of military service, I have never seen strategies that are simultaneously more effective and more ethical. But the military applications were only one aspect of the broader transformation taking place. Trade Minister Yilara of the Cetacean Union had spent months working with the Shadow Maws to understand their economic philosophies, and the results had revolutionized galactic commerce. The Shadow Maws have no concept of scarcity-based economics, Trade Minister Yilara reported to the Assembly. Their entire civilization is built on abundance thinking and cooperative resource management. They've developed systems for ensuring that every member of their society has access to everything they need while maintaining perfect ecological balance. The economic principles had proven remarkably adaptable to galactic-scale challenges. Several member worlds had begun implementing Shadow Maw-inspired resource distribution systems, with results that exceeded all projections for efficiency and satisfaction. The planet Xerion 7, which had been struggling with resource shortages and social unrest for decades, had volunteered to serve as a pilot program for Shadow Maw economic principles. Within 3 months, they had eliminated scarcity-related conflicts and increased overall productivity by over 200%, while simultaneously reducing environmental impact by 80%. Elena smiled as she watched Kethara prepare to address the assembly directly. The communication systems that had been developed to facilitate Shadow Maw participation in galactic governance represented another breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. Rather than forcing the Shadow Maws to adapt to existing galactic languages, joint teams had created entirely new communication protocols that allowed each species to contribute their natural communication strengths. Honored friends, Kethara's voice resonated through the chamber via the new translation matrix. We come before you today not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as partners offering collaboration for the benefit of all civilization. The Shadow Maw's direct address marked the first time in galactic history that a non-technological species had been granted full speaking privileges in the council chambers. The moment was symbolic of how profoundly First Contact had changed galactic attitudes toward intelligence and civilization. Kethara continued with carefully measured words that demonstrated the sophisticated political understanding the Shadow Maws had developed over their millennia of social evolution. Our species has observed your civilizations for many generations, waiting for the moment when contact could be established through mutual respect rather than dominance. The humans provided that opportunity, and the partnerships that have emerged demonstrate what becomes possible when different forms of intelligence work together as equals. The speech laid out a comprehensive proposal for integrating Shadow Maw knowledge and capabilities into existing galactic infrastructure while maintaining the independence and unique characteristics of all participating species. It was a vision of cooperative civilization that went far beyond simple diplomatic relations. Ancient wise mind Turok of the crystalline hierarchy had become one of the strongest advocates for full Shadow Maw integration. Colleagues, the partnership between humans and Shadow Maws has produced more advancement in 6 months than many of our traditional research programs achieve in decades. The time has come to formally recognize that intelligence takes many forms, and that our greatest strength lies in celebrating those differences rather than trying to impose uniformity. The formal proposal before the Council was ambitious in scope. It called for the establishment of joint research facilities on multiple worlds, the integration of Shadow Maw ecological principles into galactic environmental management, the adoption of their conflict resolution techniques for interspecies disputes, and the creation of new educational exchange programs that would allow young people from all species to learn from Shadow Maw wisdom. But perhaps most significantly, it proposed fundamentally altering the definition of civilization itself. Instead of requiring technological advancement measured by traditional standards, the new criteria would recognize any society that demonstrated sophisticated intelligence, sustainable resource management, and peaceful cooperative abilities. Elena knew the vote would be close. Despite the obvious benefits of partnership with the Shadow Maws, there remained those who were uncomfortable with accepting non-technological species as equals in galactic governance. The debate had raged for weeks in committee sessions, with some delegates arguing that granting full membership to the Shadow Maws would set a precedent that could destabilize traditional power structures. Ambassador Zethka had emerged as the most eloquent spokesperson for change. "We stand at a crossroads in galactic history," he told the Assembly during the final debate session. "We can continue to define civilization by our narrow technological criteria and limit our potential to current understanding. Or we can embrace the broader definition that recognizes intelligence in all its forms and opens our civilization to previously unimaginable possibilities." The Vraxian diplomat had spent considerable time on Kepler 442b, experiencing firsthand the sophistication of Shadow Maw society. "I have walked through cities that grow from living trees, witnessed communication networks that span continents through biological connections, and observed social coordination that surpasses anything our finest AI systems can achieve. To call this primitive because it doesn't match our technological paradigms is not just wrong, it's destructively arrogant." Dr. Melissa Chen had prepared extensive documentation of Shadow Maw scientific achievements to support the integration proposal. "Their biological computing systems process information at quantum speeds while using only a fraction of the energy required by our artificial systems," she presented to the Science Committee. Their ecological engineering maintains perfect environmental balance on a planetary scale without any of the pollution or resource depletion that plague our traditional approaches. Their social governance systems have maintained peace and prosperity for their entire recorded history, without any of the conflicts that continue to challenge our civilizations. The evidence was overwhelming, but cultural change moved slowly even in the face of clear benefits. Several species remained concerned about the implications of accepting fundamentally different approaches to civilization and technology. The hegemony representative, Councillor Vextar, voiced the primary concern during the final debate session. While we acknowledge the impressive capabilities of the Shadow Maws, we must consider the precedent we are establishing. If we grant full membership based on biological rather than technological advancement, how do we maintain standards for galactic citizenship? What prevents every primitive world from claiming equal status based on alternative definitions of intelligence? Elena had anticipated this concern and prepared her response carefully. Councillor Vextar, the Shadow Maws don't represent primitive intelligence claiming equality through alternative standards. They represent sophisticated intelligence that has achieved remarkable advancement through different methods. The question isn't whether we should lower our standards, but whether we should expand our understanding of what advancement can look like. Kethara supplemented Elena's response with a demonstration that silenced skeptical voices throughout the chamber. Working through the biological communication systems the Shadow Maws had helped develop, Kethara established real-time contact with every Shadow Maw on Kepler 442b, then expanded the network to include monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, and finally linked to the AI systems of several member worlds. This is not primitive technology, Kethara explained, as data flowed seamlessly between biological, artificial, and hybrid systems. This is intelligence that has evolved to work with natural rather than artificial systems, but intelligence nonetheless. We offer not replacement of your approaches, but partnership that combines the best of all our methods. The demonstration convinced even the most skeptical delegates. The Shadow Maws weren't asking to be accepted despite their differences, but were offering to contribute their unique capabilities to the greater galactic community. When the vote was finally called, the result was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, a non-technological species was granted full membership in the Galactic Council, not as a curiosity or subordinate member, but as an equal partner in shaping the future of interstellar civilization. The moment marked more than just diplomatic achievement. It represented a fundamental evolution in how intelligence was understood and valued throughout the galaxy. The humans had not only made peaceful contact with a supposedly deadly predator, they had facilitated the integration of an entire civilization whose contributions would reshape galactic society for generations to come. Elena stood beside Kethara as the formal membership documents were signed, using both traditional galactic protocols and new ceremonial approaches that honored Shadow Maw customs. 6 months ago they called you a deadly beast, she said quietly to her massive companion. Today you're recognized as one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy. Kethara's response carried harmonics of contentment and anticipation. 6 months ago, we were isolated and alone, defending ourselves from beings who approached us as enemies. Today, we are part of a community that spans the stars, working together to build a future none of us could achieve separately. The change represented more than just political alliance. On Kepler 442b, the joint human Shadow Maw community had become a model for interspecies cooperation that was being studied and replicated throughout the galaxy. Young people from dozens of different species applied for residency in the growing settlement, eager to experience life in a truly integrated society. Dr. Park had established the first interspecies university on Kepler 442b, where traditional academic subjects were taught alongside Shadow Maw ecological philosophy, biological engineering, and social harmony techniques. The waiting list for admission included applicants from every member species of the Galactic Council. Admiral Korvac had worked with Shadowmaw strategists to develop new peacekeeping protocols that emphasized understanding and integration rather than force. The techniques had been implemented in 12 conflict zones with unprecedented success rates for peaceful resolution. Trade Minister Ylara had overseen the establishment of new economic systems that combined the efficiency of galactic trade networks with the sustainability and equity principles of Shadowmaw resource management. Early results suggested the hybrid systems could eliminate poverty and environmental degradation across multiple star systems. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The acceptance of the Shadowmaws as equals had opened galactic civilization to possibilities that had never been seriously considered. Dozens of worlds that had been dismissed as having only primitive life were being re-evaluated for potential intelligent species that might have developed along different technological paths. Elena's final report to the Galactic Council summarized the transformation with simple clarity. 6 months ago, we embarked on a mission to make peaceful contact with what we believed was a dangerous predator. We discovered instead a sophisticated civilization that had been waiting patiently for contact based on respect rather than fear. In learning to see the Shadowmaws as friends rather than beasts, we have opened our entire civilization to new understandings of intelligence, cooperation, and the possibilities that emerge when different forms of wisdom work together. The story that had begun with a human offering food to a supposedly deadly creature had become the foundation for a new era of galactic civilization. The beast had never been deadly except in defense. The humans had simply been the first to offer friendship instead of force. And in that simple act of kindness and respect, they had transformed not just their own understanding, but the future of intelligence throughout the galaxy.